Hi folks, in today's video I'll show you how to paint this Winter Kurnoth Hunter. So I'm starting off with the interior of it. I find that with a lot of these pieces it's easier to paint it and then put it together. So I wanted to have this kind of blue magic look for this, I'm not sure exactly what it's called, the magic interior, the spark that's brought it to life, as I like to think about it. I'm sure there's probably some lore around this, I just haven't read that far. But I'm using contrast Talassar blue to paint this in really quick. And there you see it's going on with contrast, one thick coat, and I will actually go in and do some edge highlighting to really make this pop and have a little bit more of a magic look. But this gave me kind of a quick first step, especially for that interior where it's not as noticeable. It's kind of hidden and sometimes in a little bit of shadow. So while I have it apart, I'm also going to paint the interior of the body. I'm basing it in Dryad bark. That's going to be one of the colors that I use for a base. So just providing a nice dark interior to have that nice contrast between the blue of the that magic thingy and the interior of the wood of the body of this hunter. So I'm not being too worried about spilling it over or anything, just really making sure that I'm painting all the way around, as well as because I'm going to be gluing those pieces together, I want to make sure that I don't have any white bits that aren't painted. Now if you base in black, you're going to have less of an issue of the base showing through. So there you can see I glued those two pieces together. I unfortunately forgot to show how I painted those edge highlightings, but don't worry, I do that later on. So now I'm painting in the lighter wood color and basing it with Kislev flesh. I wanted to have kind of more of maybe a birch type color to contrast with a darker tone, as well as a kind of more of a bluey tone, to have those different parts of the mini kind of come across. So I kind of saw this, this is maybe the flesh bits of the hunter, and then the darker brown and the blue wood as the armor. So that's kind of how I'm figuring out which parts to paint. So this is the stomach and neck, head, and pieces of the arms and legs. So I've gone ahead and painted, you can see in the back, all of that. I'm really only showing the body, but I'm following all of these steps through with the rest of the arms and legs, as well as the head. So now I'm adding in some shade with Agrax Earthshade. So this does bring it a little darker, but and focusing on getting that shade, that ink, down into the crevices. Moving it around, kind of pushing the paint where I want it to settle. When I need to, I'll load up a little bit more. If I get too much in one spot, I'll dry off my brush a little bit and kind of use that to suck it up. But I am letting this sit fairly heavy to really bring out the sculpt of this mini. Now that that's fully dry, make sure to let it dry. It will take quite a while to dry. I am going to go in and add in some dry brush with Eldar flesh. So I did get a little bit too much on my brush there. Be careful with dry brushing that you do get most of the paint off of the brush, and also don't drop your mini. But I use makeup brushes. I find they're really great as dry brushes, and just lightly moving it back and forth over the mini to bring out those high parts. And for the base of this, I also focused a lot on kind of the opening into the abdomen to bring that into a little bit more light than some of the rest of it. While I'm letting that dry, I'm going to start in by basing in the darker wood parts, again with Dryad bark, so the same color I used for the interior. And I'm trying to be a little careful, not get too much spread around, so I'm using a little bit of a finer brush here, working it into those crevices. And here's a tip, if you have raised bits of your mini, kind of think about starting from the inside out or from the bottom up. So I'm painting in this dark brown part of the chest, and then I'll go in and those raised bits around the neckline and the arms I'll paint in blue after I do this. So there's that Dryad bark, and I'm going in and painting in techless blue these cracks, kind of these like cool, like magic is breaking through the wood, and just filling that in. And if you're doing this step and you get a little bit on the Dryad bark brown, don't worry, you can go back in and touch it up. I like doing this after doing the base layer, because then if I don't fully fill in those cracks, it doesn't show quite as much. Then to bring out a little bit more dimension to this, I'm going in with Lothern blue and just adding some highlights here and there, kind of where some of the cracks are bigger, as well as along kind of where I think the light would be hitting it. And I also, you can see it a little bit better here on this leg piece, so I'm following the lines. And you can see in this I also kind of, it's a little messy, and I do go back in off camera and clean up the Dryad bark after I've painted this. But yeah, I'm kind of focusing, not painting the whole thing, but focusing on some, bringing a little bit more shape to it. So now I'm going to go in and add the Agrax Earthshade. Be careful not to fill in the parts that where the blue is. So I'm being a little bit more careful with where I place this. I'm not painting it all over the entirety of what I've painted with Dryad bark, but really focusing that shade kind of up into the areas where there would be shadow, and placing it there. So in this bit, I'm just kind of slapping it right on, not worrying too much, but on that front, I was being a little bit more careful where it is that I place it. And then we'll let this dry. Now that it is fully dry, I'm going to come in and dry brush, you guessed it, with Sylvaneth bark. And again, I'm focusing a lot on that opening. I really found that kind of helped make it pop. And if you're working, making a mini that's wood toned, it is okay to have a little bit more paint, I think, on your dry brush. You can see on the front of the chest, that actually can add a little bit of kind of a wood grain effect to your mini. But if you aren't going for that effect, make sure that you're cleaning off most of that paint on a paper towel or cloth or something before you bring it to your mini. You can also kind of, to test it, like brush it onto your thumb and see how much paint comes off. All right, so now that that is dry, we're going back in with the Fang to base in this kind of bluer tone wood. This is kind of where I'm bringing in a little bit more of that like winter feel, so kind of like a frozen wood, not as literal as I've done with some of the other seasonal Sylvaneth minis, but this is a little bit more maybe abstract, because you don't necessarily have blue wood in the winter, but giving a little bit of that like cold, icy effect. That is one thing to keep in mind as you're picking your paints, kind of what do people associate with those different colors. I tend to associate cold with blue, warm with red, all of that. All right, so now that that base layer is dry, we're going to go in and paint in the shade with Drakenhof Nightshade, and just really kind of getting it in all over. Same thing I've said before. And we'll say, since I'm doing all of these pieces separately, paint the body, and then I move on, paint the arms and legs, and most of the time, by the time I'm done with the arms and legs, the body has dried, so I can go on to the next step. You can also do this if you are like painting your dryads, by kind of doing it in an assembly line so that you aren't having to wait a lot between steps. Now that that has dried fully, I'm going in and dry brushing in Fenrisian gray, and following the same exact steps I've talked about previously with the dry brushing, really kind of bringing in the different levels And yeah, I kind of set that collar on the top just so that it held down, and I also knew kind of where I was going to be seeing those higher points where the light was going to be hitting it. And so I was trying to be a little bit more careful with the dry brush, and then took it off so that I could get to the stuff underneath. And that is the nice thing about, you know, waiting until after you've painted to fully glue together some of these minis, especially Warhammer minis. It allows you to get into spaces that you can't really access very well once they're fully glued together. I will just say, keep all of the pieces together and do dry fitting as you go, just to make sure you're painting like the right side. Alright, so I'm following similar steps for the head, but I figured I'd show a little bit more detail on this one. So I'm starting out actually with the eyes and painting it in Techless blue. I wanted that light color for the eyes. Getting it in, trying to be careful not to get too much painted around kind of the eyelids and stuff like that, but I will be going through and basing in the skin, so again, don't worry too much if you get a little bit of spillage. And I'm also using this to paint in the swirl on the head, just basing this in. And because I'm going to be painting the head in the lighter wood tone, I'm not as worried about not kind of filling that, having any gaps or anything in this. So now that that has dried, I'm going to come in with Drakenhof Nightshade to add a little bit of dimension to the eye. And I'm really focusing it at the corners of the eye, but letting it kind of fall in. And you can see how it really quickly gives a lot of dimension to that. Suddenly it goes from flat to, oh look, there's an eye there. And to bring it out even more, we're going to go in with Lothern blue and just very carefully, I've got a little tiny psycho brush, and paint in the eyeball. Being very careful. Move your mini around so that you can get it kind of where you can see it, but you can also situate your brush where you can move it. And there you go. All right, so now we're gonna base in the skin tone with Kislev flesh. And I just kind of shoved this onto a pin so that I wasn't holding the mini, I was holding onto the pin. You could also glue this together, maybe base in the face, especially the neck area first, and then glue it down to the mini before doing all of this, if you aren't able to, if you don't have a pin or something else you can stick it to. And adding a little bit of shade with Agrax Earthshade, really letting it settle into the mouth, the corners of that mouth there. And then very carefully bringing it around the rest of the mini. I'm not taking it too much onto the forehead around that swirl, so that's also helping add a little bit of dimension. And I'm just pulling a little bit of it out of the corners of the mouth, and we'll let that fully dry. All right, and the final step is I wanted to transition the horns on the head a little bit into the kind of hair headdress. So just with Fenrisian gray, I am dry brushing that on. And there we go. So now we've got the bow. So this I'm doing in Talassar blue, bringing back in that Talassar blue that I painted in the very first step, and just slathering it on. You know, I do like how the contrast paints kind of let you skip a couple of steps. And especially this blue, I think it's so vibrant that it works really well for something that you want to kind of have a not natural look to it. So that's why I wanted to use it for this bow as well as the center part of the chest. All right, so now we'll let that dry and come back in once it's fully dry with Drakenhof Nightshade, just to bring this part of the bow down, to add a little bit of dimension, a little bit of difference between it. So, times that play around with those different layers and all of that, but it still has some depth to it. Now I'm just doing a little bit of edge highlighting with Lothern blue. I like to have a fine brush, get just a little bit of paint on it, and actually use the side of the brush to paint. So this is the same process that I used for that center bit in the chest. And just getting the very tips of it, and also get the very tips around the handholds. Just to bring a little bit more dimension. This is something you can do to just kind of really make that contrast pop a little bit more. So there you have it. Now I just have to paint up his little arrow bug and base him. And if you want to see how I paint up the arrow bug for this Great Bow Hunter, you can head on over to our Patreon page where you can find a patron exclusive video on the process. A big thanks to all of our patrons, especially AJ. You can support our channel by heading on over to our Patreon page and checking out the perks of being a patron. All right, there is the finished miniature, all complete and based. I had a really great time painting this up, and I think it's going to look great with my other 4 seasons Sylvaneth army. If you want to see more pictures of our miniatures and keep up to date on all of the things that we're doing, make sure that you're following us on our social media. Thank you so much for watching. I'd love to see pictures of your painted miniatures and also know what option did you go with for your hunters? Did you go with the great bow, the great sword, or the scythe? Or were you adventurous and you magnetized? So you have the different options. I'd love to know in the comments below. Thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and like this. If you've got a friend that's painting some Sylvaneth miniatures, maybe share it with them. All right, we'll see you next time on Roll for Initiative. Bye!